Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw us some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall.
And right before I came in here, Niall, I've dodged this problem so far. In my, before my current living situation, I was living alone, and you were also living nearby. And so recording was a pretty simple process for us where I could just go over to your place and we could go into your little home studio and set things up. But today I finally had a dreaded moment where I knew we were about to record and my roommate and his girlfriend were out in the living room having a good time.
And you have to tell, so you finally had the having to tell your roommate to shut the fuck up.
Yes, I did. In fact, I didn't tell him to shut the fuck up. Let's be very clear here.
That's the nice one. You did the nice version of that, but
Yeah.
Look, intentions are clear.
Yeah, I literally went out there and I was like, I feel terrible doing this, but I need to record. I am sorry. I know you're out here all mirthful and giggling. And by the way, if folks want to hear the mirthful giggling of my current roommate, Elliot, he actually shows up on a Patreon podcast that I do called Internet Experience Deluxe. So if you donate $5 to the It Gets Weird Patreon, you can listen to that. Just a little bit of a plug. I feel like
he's never been on the main show.
No, I don't think so. Although that would be
okay.
that'd be fun. I think we should do that sometime because Elliot is, especially after living with me for a handful of months now, has like been subjected to a lot of this stuff. Like I'll be walking around actually listening to Art Bell, or just I'll just do that thing that I do where I'll randomly bring up some really fucking weird esoteric thing in casual conversation, and the other person's eyes will sort of, glaze over a little bit, but Elliot's eyes don't glaze over. That's the important thing here.
Yeah, that's how you know you got a real one.
Exactly.
If they can put up with it and not have their eyes glaze over and look like they're about to fall asleep, then you've got a good one.
Yeah. Now, Niall, this last week I talked about Art Bell, the sort of life leading up to Coast AM. So
and how staying up on broadcast for like 5 days in a row is probably what caused a lot of his strangeness.
It may have been a factor. It's hard to say.
That's just my prevailing theory at this point. I don't know the man, of course. It just is. Hearing those stories really opened up the floodgates for me in terms of understanding this man.
Yeah, it certainly didn't help, and I mean he himself he says that in the book, but. So yeah, last week we had our part 1 discussion about Art Bell. I had mostly focused on the life of Art leading up to the inception of the radio talk show Coast to Coast AM, which was in 1988. Briefly going over the last things I mentioned, he sort of put this together with another sound engineer named Alan Corbeth. And there's a lot leading up to this. And I skipped over some of the finer details because I can't imagine people listening to our podcast are like, oh, well, tell me about like the logistics of like radio syndication. I'm not going to do that.
Let's get into like radio rights fees and like, making sure all of your music, your blanket music licensing and everything going, and maybe even do a deep dive on the payola scandal,
Yes. Well, if you want those details, I will say a lot of my information comes from Art Bell's book, The Art of Talk, which is like one of the few things that Art Bell has put out while he was alive about his personal life, getting into those details. If you really want to know, check that out. Also, I have to put out some brief corrections just because the nature of the book, The Art of Talk, he skips over some things and also doesn't detail certain things, and even in some cases like uses different names. Because like this book, I believe it was like 98 or 99. I said that I didn't know who the woman was he was seeing in Japan, but he actually, during his time in Japan, was married to a Japanese woman, and her name was Sachiko, back in 1965. And in the book, like I said, he brings up how like she had like, I guess, mental problems, and he doesn't really explain that, and he then jumps to going back to the U.S. But apparently their whole situation ended in divorce due to quote unquote personal differences. Again, I don't I don't know what that means really.
I mean, I don't need to go into speculating on someone's divorce, but there are the legal, because as far as I know, there are the like legal reasons you can have a divorce, which is like you can annul it before it is fully like whatever the fuck. And then irreconcilable differences is one of the ones that a lot of people do. There's also like infidelity and stuff like that pop up. And it seems like this one was just we don't get along and don't want to be married anymore.
It's really
works for them.
It's not that important, but I know that like, cause like I was just going based off of what was in the book, and then I later found this. And I know that like, I don't know, maybe there's some Art Bell scholars out there who are just like going to, I'm just getting ahead of that just in case. So
who are you going to dream cast in your upcoming Art Bell biopic?
Ooh,
Art.
Don't jump too far ahead,
Oh,
Niall.
shit.
We haven't even gotten to the big
shit.
question. I don't know.
I'm just going to keep trying to get ahead of your big questions every episode. That's just going to be my new bit, I think.
we can come back to that idea. But we're getting, this is the problem where like you are around another person, you're friends with another person for so goddamn long that you do end up developing a bit of a mind link with them. That may or may not.
Our big questions tend to be the kind of bullshit that we just like while talking to each other, we'll just ask. Like, there's not a big mystery to the big question each week.
Yeah, that's true.
It really is just like the kind of shit that you, Garrett, and I would just like bring up at 2 a.m.
Yes.
And be like, what about this? And just everyone laughs and tries to figure it out. That's just what happens.
That's true. We do love to stay up till 2 a.m. and perform mental experiments about, theoretical movies about who would play people like Art Bell. And that's a classic bit that we do. So that we'll get to that later. But I'm going to kind of jump off where I left off from the last episode. Where we kind of left a story where Art is living in Pahrump, Nevada, and he's broadcasting out of his home. So he'd gotten this arrangement with Chancellor Broadcasting to get his show syndicated, and even convinced them to help get his broadcasting setup going at his house. He has a funny little thing here that I just wanted to mention, because Art was ahead of the curve on the work from home craze, which, I'll say it. We shouldn't get used to that, okay? It's time to go back to the office, okay?
Please don't say that too loudly. I now live in another state from my office, so that would be quite difficult for me.
I literally worked from home today, so... But in his book, Art Bell says this about working from home. He says, quote, "Working at home is great. I have all my comforts. I can pet my cats." By the way, Art's a huge cat guy. He loves animals, especially cats. He has a whole thing about cats in the book, but you're going to have to read the book for that.
He has a whole thing about cats in the cradle.
And the silver spoon. Yeah. He says, "My wife is at home with me, either listening or safely asleep." He's talking about Ramona here. "This is comforting to me. She does either activity half the time. I can get up in the middle of my program and go out to the kitchen and grab some pretzels. I remember one time the news had about 2 minutes left, and for some reason I ran out to the kitchen for some pretzels. Well, I got to the kitchen to find a big bag of pretzels, which only contained pretzel dust at the bottom. And I thought, what the hell? So I upended the bag and put this pretzel dust in my mouth. It turns out that the pretzel dust was actually a mixture of 10% pretzel dust and 90% salt. I thought I was going to die. I don't know how I managed to get back on the air 2 minutes later. I was choking and coughing and gagging. I now stay clear of pretzel dust. I also stay clear of dairy products like milk. Milk has a way of creating mucus, which interferes with articulating clearly.
So, I mean, that's just correct. Like,
it's true. But that's the kind of content you're getting out of this book half the time. So
yeah, practical radio advice. Good. Like it's the art of talking. He's telling you how not to fuck up your talking.
Exactly. Well, if you haven't heard the actual Coast to Coast AM, I just want to say that it's a bit more exciting than this book. So let's get into Coast to Coast. Niall, have you listened to much Coast to Coast?
I've listened to scattered bits here and there. I remember listening to some stuff for, I think, the Man from Taurid episode. I've listened to I think some stuff about the face of Mars. Like, it's never a thing where I've sat down and like listened to an entire broadcast. It's always been someone is calling in or being interviewed on the show that is related to a thing that I'm interested in or am researching for this show, and have listened to stuff that way. So I won't say I've listened to a shit ton of it, but I have a passing familiarity, I guess.
Yeah, I've listened to a lot of it. And in fact, it's kind of a reverse for me where like I'll listen to episodes and then a topic will come up that I hadn't heard of, and I will look into it and find that it's episode worthy for our show. Like that's how I found the Gulf Breeze 6 initially.
Okay.
So I've digested quite a bit of Coast to Coast AM at this point. But you know, if you've listened, you know, he greets you with his velvety voice from the great American Southwest. He talks about how he's from the kingdom of Nye, which is just a reference to his broadcasting station being located in Nye County and the station itself being KNYE 95.1. Now, I mentioned also last episode that he had a show previously at KDWN in Vegas called West Coast AM. And this had been, as far as I understand it, a pretty traditional political like call-in show. With the transition towards Coast to Coast AM and the material that they would cover on that show, a lot of the political content would start disappearing. I couldn't tell you exactly when or how the transition went down here, but by the early 90s, Coast to Coast AM was pretty firmly planted in the realm of UFOs, the paranormal, conspiracy theory, cryptozoology, things like that. I can tell you as early as 1993, Art was interviewing the likes of John Lear and Bob Exler. I think that's how you say his name. And Art had done a show, actually, I should briefly mention, at KDWN before Coast to Coast called Area 2000. And this was a show that he describes as dealing with issues that arose as we headed towards the turn of the century, which is a big theme with a lot of his stuff is hitting the year 2000 and the new millennium.
I feel like that was a massive, like, okay. So I get why it was such a massive brainworm for a lot of people, just from like how we structure our society and everything. But it really does feel like it kind of large scale forgets that the year 2000 is entirely arbitrary, and it just was, we started counting it at some point. It's not like related to like I remember Y2K and like the effect it had on people and like all of the scaremongering and the news reports and all that shit. And the more that I look back on it, the more I'm just like, there's no reason other than like, can computers handle the extra like place marker in their memory systems?
That's
about the only thing that actually had any
actual issue that like people were rationally like theorizing about being a problem was whether or not the transition from the way computers sort of counted back then on these dates, like counted's not the right word, but the short version is exactly what you said. Like they were trying to, people weren't sure what was going to happen based off of how computers held dates, like transitioning to the year 2000 could be problematic thing, potentially maybe crashing and potentially, computers crashing around the world. But obviously that's not what happened. Actually, patreon.com/itgetsweird on Internet Experience Deluxe, I did a Y2K episode. So
Very
check
nice.
that out. But I think for people like Art Bell and a lot of the conspiracy stuff, it's like this, like, okay, if you look at it from the perspective of especially somebody in like the late 80s or 90s who doesn't know that much about computers, it can look like there's like a big unknown here on the horizon. I mean, and the conspiracy mindset is like you're gonna put stuff in that unknown.
Oh yeah,
and try and figure out what could happen
look,
with flawed information. Typically,
there is totally an aspect of hindsight is 2020 when it comes to this. Like I'm now like it's 20 years after the fact. So but like looking back, I always just think like it's really interesting how like the entire world was there. There were people convinced that the world was going to end.
Yeah.
And it really just nothing happened.
Yeah. So this is Area 2000 was a show that he had at the old radio station. That show would end with the advent of Coast to Coast AM. And like I said, he was already in the early 90s talking to people like John Lear and Exler. And just as a brief aside to help paint a picture, John Lear is, whoa. I need to do an episode on this guy. He's popped up in a lot of stories we've covered. He was an airline pilot and son of Learjet aerospace manufacturing magnate Bill Lear. And he was also a CIA spook, essentially, or is thought of as being one. He flew planes for the CIA for some reason. And he's connected to so much bullshit. It's incredible. He was active on this early bulletin board system in the 1980s called Paranet, which I think a lot of stories that would then end up on Coast to Coast also sort of branched off of that. Paranet was, dedicated to the discussion of the paranormal. And there, Lear was sharing UFO conspiracy theories about the U.S. government working with aliens and things of that nature. So Lear's story, spills out into all these different avenues. So, Niall, you tell me when this starts to smell like bullshit to you. Lear is connected to the Majestic 12 documents.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Directly, he's also connected to a story of Germany, claiming that Germany recovered a downed UFO during World War II.
Also bullshit.
He helped bring Bob Lazar onto the scene.
Goddamn full of bullshit. Okay.
He worked with Milton Cooper, who is the guy who would write the book Behold a Pale Horse. He would go from UFO conspiracy theorist to this anti-government proto-QAnon type guy. He's killed in a standoff with police when he tries to evade arrest for tax evasion.
We talked about this guy recently. And
Lear personally pushed Bill Moore at the infamous 1989 MUFON Symposium, where Moore admitted to acting as a disinfo agent to discredit Paul Benowitz.
Jesus. Okay.
So
this guy, this guy is the behind the, so if we think of the last, I don't know, 15 episodes of It Gets Weird, dating back to your UFO disinformation trilogy, as a cinematic universe, he would be at this point, the guy that would come out from behind the curtain and be running be behind all of the shit that we've covered.
He would be
recently.
He would be one of those people that seems to be. It's like him, Rick Doty, people like that. There's a group of people, and I can't sit here and try and map it out in this episode because it's not really what we're talking about. But this is a lot of stuff. So listeners, if you're unfamiliar with the different bullshit I just mentioned. All you really need to understand is that Lear is notorious. He's divisive within the UFO community, probably for very good reason. He's often accused of deliberately sowing fallacious conspiracies and claims. And then the other guy that Art was talking with this early in Coast to Coast's career, Bob Exler, this was an ex-NASA guy who ended up, as I understand it, he was entangled in UFO research in the 80s and 90s, claiming to have gained information about UFO tech and that it was being used by the U.S. government. But supposedly he was able to, I guess, get this information in intelligence agency documents, and then by directly speaking with intelligence agency agents. And he seems to have believed that these agencies in the U.S. had direct contact with extraterrestrial intelligences. So,
okay.
First, we're going to talk about both of these guys someday in a more complete way, but I wanted to sort of show you the kinds of people that would show up on Coast to Coast AM that Art was speaking with directly, even in the early years of Coast to Coast. But we've talked about like what I mentioned, John Lear's connections. We've talked about a lot of that stuff on this show, so you can look up different terms on the It Gets Weird Libsyn website and find those episodes. But just to give you some more like idea of the kinds of people that would show up on here, and feel free to jump off any of these people to talk about them if you want to, but you're gonna recognize basically all these names.
Okay.
These are people that have been on Coast to Coast. So in 1993, he would interview Al Bielek, who was
God,
self-proclaimed survivor of both the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia Experiment. In 1994, he would discuss cattle mutilation with Linda Moulton Howe.
Yep. Okay.
In 94, he would speak with, you know him, you love him, Richard Hoagland.
The big cheese himself.
They would literally discuss the faces of Mars and things like that, and Sidonia and whatnot. Both Hoagland and Howe, and a lot of these names would become regular recurring guests on the show. In 1995, he interviewed Randolph Winters, who is the guy who put together a report on Billy Meyer and the Pleiadians. And
okay, yep.
I looked into this guy, and apparently now he writes like novels about vampires, but it's also like based in ancient aliens. So that's what he's up to.
Okay.
In 1996, he would speak with Whitley Strieber, who horror author, self-proclaimed contactee who wrote the alleged nonfiction book Communion about his experience being abducted by a UFO and the entities in there. And also Whitley Strieber would just like become friends with Art Bell. Like they would be partners in content creation, if you will, because that's what you got to say in 2023.
Yeah, we don't broadcast anymore. We're content creators.
Right.
We're not podcasters. We're
exactly.
We're
Thank you for finally fucking saying it. I've been pestering you about bringing the term content creation into the show more often. So thank you.
I come from a background of people that really go down the like fucking what's wow, why am I blanking on every fucking name at the moment? I'm trying to the guy from fucking Big Black and Shellac. Jesus Christ.
Oh. Oh no. I have so many UFO people's names in my head. Why can't I think of their name? You mean the audio engineer, producer?
Steve Albini.
Steve Albini, thank you. Yeah.
Christ. I'm going through advanced mental deterioration. Like the whole like he never will allow himself to be credited as a producer, only as an engineer. You know, like
yes,
the whole like demystification of the creative process kind of ideal. Mm-hmm. And so I buck the content creation term, but
thank you.
I'll allow it, I guess.
1996, he speaks with Terrence McKenna, who is, a mystic and psychedelics advocate who popularized the machine elves entities from DMT drug trips, as well as the stoned ape theory of human evolution.
I've tried to do a stoned ape episode for this show before.
We could talk about Terrence McKenna, probably.
Yeah, it probably has to be a Terrence McKenna episode because, like, I struggled to turn it in the stoned ape theory itself into a full episode, but we may get to that eventually. I think it's interesting. It's fun,
and it's one of Joe Rogan's favorites. And we got to beat him at his own game. So,
yeah, Jesus.
Some other notable guests that I'll just kind of quickly go through. There's Peter Davenport of the National UFO Reporting Center, Newfork. Dr. Stephen Greer, founder of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Zechariah Sitchin, ancient astronaut theorist and author.
Oh man, that's one of my books that I'm thinking about doing for the bonus feed.
Do you have one of Sitchin's books?
I have one of Zechariah Sitchin books. Yes,
I think I do too. I don't remember which one, but I think I have one.
I have Chariots of the Gods.
Oh yeah, okay, that is the one. I have Chariots of the Gods. Jesus. uh, uh, oh, Art also really loved Professor Michio Kaku, who is like a theoretical physicist. Like he would talk with him a lot about like science and future technology and things like that. But like he wouldn't always interview just like conspiracy theorists and ufologists and things like that. He had interviews with like celebrities and actors and whatnot. So like, he's known for like he interviewed Willie Nelson, Casey Kasem. He has an interview with Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files.
Oh, cool!
Lots of stuff.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've listened to it. I've listened to a Willie Nelson interview as well, which is less interesting to me, to be honest. But it was kind of fun learning that Willie Nelson's like a diehard Art Bell fan.
Okay. I mean, that kind of makes sense with his like hippie,
yeah,
but like open-minded hippiness, you know?
Yeah. So Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM would basically rule the airwaves throughout the 90s. I remember reading somewhere that was like the 4th most popular show in the United States, period. Despite airing late at night. So it was like, I think 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. PST. So it would air super late and then even later in other parts of the country. But Coast to Coast would still end up being one of the top listened radio shows in the United States. And at the height of its popularity in the late 90s, it aired on over 500 radio stations and raked in over 10 million weekly listeners. So Coast to Coast was a big fucking deal.
Yeah. I think that like a lot of people kind of forget that now because even like the whole idea of this kind of show doesn't really exist anymore. Like,
yeah,
podcasting has taken over, and people do still listen to long format. Like, here you're listening for the interviewer talking to whoever is on that week. Like,
yeah,
this style of show still exists, but the idea of it being that popular and that widely distributed for like such a quote unquote niche thing, that's the thing that I'm always kind of curious about, is like conspiracy theory and this whole world of weird, whatever you want to call it, is so many people think of it as this like tiny niche interest, when really, like, if you're not devoting your entire life to it, a lot of people have like a passing interest and are casually interested in the weird shit that happens. So it can get very popular, I guess. It's like, I don't think it's nearly as niche of an interest as some people like to make it out to seem.
Yeah.
Just because people are scared of being branded a conspiracy theorist effectively.
Yeah. I do think that these last couple years, especially, I don't mean this in a negative way necessarily, but just about everybody I know, seems to have an opinion on one weird phenomena or another. I think you're right. It has much broader appeal than people might expect.
Whoever is running the simulation we all live in has lately been saying the quiet part a little too loud in terms of a lot of conspiracy theories. It's a little too public.
It's a little much.
Turn that knob back down. Someone was like playing in the simulation chamber and touched a button and like turned a knob up just a little too much.
Yeah, they knocked it. Oops, that went to 11.
Or America's crumbling. One of the two.
It could be one of those two things. I couldn't possibly pinpoint which one, but Coast to Coast AM was extremely popular. It's still around, by the way. It's just Art Bell isn't around anymore, and he hasn't hosted it in a long time. But how did this show become so popular? Well, I think you're right about the broad appeal that people don't quite expect. But Art actually has some thoughts on how he managed to tap into what I think through the 90s was a bit more of a sexy topic, which is conspiracy theory and all this stuff. So Art says this in his book: I think the show is popular mostly because the show is unplanned, unregulated. The show may or may not be topical at any given broadcast. The show is fun, and my listeners have the freedom to direct the show. Many of the greatest competitors are limited by their own format, while my show is not. For example, when Coast to Coast AM is picked up by a very large affiliate, which is in direct competition with another large affiliate in the city, perhaps one of the more influential stations in the area, I am not concerned. I know the people at most other stations limit themselves by dictating what callers can discuss on the air for a particular broadcast. Rather than allow the listeners and callers to decide what they want to discuss, the station will be very specific what the topic is for discussion, and anyone calling who does not adhere to this mandate is immediately disqualified from getting on the air. Their host will say, "This hour we're going to talk about gun control," or whatever else they decide. And by God, if gun control is the topic, then no other topic shall be discussed. In other words, every call is carefully screened to make sure those calling don't try to talk about a different topic than the one stipulated. And even if a caller sounds boring or dumb or old or is just in a disagreement with the host, the call screener will not allow the caller on the air. This is very restricting. I don't believe this is how you should conduct a talk show. And oh, you better believe that Coast to Coast was unscreened. So Art would often start up open lines for call-ins from listeners. He takes this idea of like restricting the topic and inverts it. He doesn't want to restrict it too much. So like he would have people come in and like he would prompt people with a topic, but he would never say, you know, we can't talk about other things. But he would try and he like, okay, for instance, he had a sort of codified topic called where they would specifically discuss hauntings and ghosts during Halloween. Okay. And the show was called Ghost to Ghost, of course.
Okay, I mean, that's fun.
But fun. If people wanted to, so people could call in with any of their stories about ghosts and stuff. But like, I'll listen to him, you know, he'll interview so-and-so about UFOs, for instance. And if somebody will call in with something about, I don't know, the Nazca lines or whatever, like he's open to it. He really is. Well, I guess was. So it was definitely loose, and the listeners could kind of dictate what was being talked about, but usually it would end up revolving around a particular topic. And so I guess that just meant that's what people wanted to talk about at the time. So this format, not really screening calls, mostly letting listeners dictate the topic and entertaining but not 100% affirming almost every fringe belief brought to the table. This would, I think, be what makes it so popular. It gives this like feeling of authenticity. It almost feels DIY. And Art asserts that he was always sincere to his listeners and that this probably came from the fact that he genuinely enjoyed talking with them. Now, kind of besides the point, but I don't know how much Art believed in everything that was being brought to him, but he would, like I said, entertain a lot of it, even if he maybe didn't necessarily believe in it. And okay. I've heard him a few times. I don't know which ones, but I've heard him a few times just outright disagree with what people are saying and kind of questioning the evidence. But I think 99% of the time somebody will come to him and be like, "Oh, the chupacabra is in town," and Art will be like, "That could be possible." So, you know,
I mean, hey, he's hasn't checked all around town. I'm sure he hasn't checked every dumpster, every back alley, whatever. The chupacabra could be in town.
It's true.
Okay,
it's true, and that's what he's saying. It's a possibility. You can't dismiss a possibility.
That's just basic journalistic integrity.
Exactly. There were other sister shows that were associated with Coast to Coast, but I think the most prominent one was a show called Dreamland. This was kind of a successor to that show I mentioned earlier, Area 2000, the one that he had with the previous radio station, which Dreamland is a reference to Area 51. Sometimes Area 51 gets called Dreamland. And this show was a bit more guest-focused and sort of interview style, whereas Coast to Coast entertained more listener call-ins. And even Art himself would say that these broadcasts of Dreamland would live or die on these interviews. And he would take any topic from these people he was interviewing, whether it was actual just straight up pseudoscience or alien abduction specialists. And later on, Art would actually because he was essentially with Dreamland and Coast to Coast. He was basically working 6 days a week. But in the book, he's like, "Oh, that's fine because I love it so much that it didn't really feel like work to me." Which that's what you want in a job, right?
Yeah, some people.
Some people. So he would eventually actually hand Dreamland over to Whitley Strieber to manage once managing both Coast to Coast and Dreamland got to be a bit too much for him. But sister shows like this, they would sort of air in not sort of, but they would air in a preceding slot to Coast AM from like 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So it had its own time. Now, throughout Coast to Coast's heyday, we would also get glimpses into Art's personal experiences with the strange. like I said, it's kind of difficult to pin down exactly what he believes, but there's a few things that suggests he is a believer of this or that phenomenon, especially when it comes to his personal experiences. So of course there's UFOs, which I think you could pretty easily argue is what Coast to Coast is most well known for. And it turns out that Art claims that he and his wife would have an actual experience, him and Ramona, with a UFO back in 1994.
Okay.
So from the Washington Post 1998 article, The Outer Limits, A Lone Voice in the Desert Lures 10 Million Listeners by Mark Fisher, it says this. It was on the way home to Pahrump from Vegas one summer night that Bell had his own close encounter. Just before midnight, Art and his wife were about a mile from home when Ramona blurted, "What the hell is that?" Art cut the engine, and the two of them looked behind the car and up. Hovering over the road was an enormous triangular craft, each side about 150 feet long, with two bright lights at each point of the triangle. After a while, the craft floated directly over the Bells. The thing was barely moving, and Bell says it was silent, dead silent. It did not appear to have an engine. After a few moments, the craft floated across the valley and out of sight. Bell calls this his UFO experience and says flatly, "It really doesn't matter that much to me if anyone believes me. Thousands of people seeing the same thing cannot all be wrong."
Okay.
So
I was hoping for something a little more in depth, but I like a personal experience is a personal experience. That works.
yeah, there's like one part where I think he describes the UFO in more detail somewhere in an interview, but it's not much. Like, it's basically the same thing. It's hovering, it's silent. I believe that the tips of it sort of have these like red and white lights, but there's not much else to his sighting. So, take it with a grain of salt, I think, because like it would be pretty convenient to have a UFO sighting as a host of Coast to Coast.
I mean,
but I don't know. Maybe he did see it. Maybe he did see something.
It's definitely possible. Like, you have no idea what it was he actually saw, but I could totally see. You don't go this hard into this area of the world without like some personal interest in it. That's why I could see there being some encounters in his past, whether they're full blown UFO encounters or if he thinks he saw a ghost or some shit. Like, there's probably some personal stake in this world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the important thing with him with all of this, especially the UFOs, is he never posits like a definitive answer for what the phenomenon is, like what's behind it. He's open to it being aliens. He's open to it being a terrestrial phenomenon by the government. It's so he doesn't, but he never definitively answers one way or another. Now, as far as stuff that he does just straight up say he believes in, one of them is he claims to have experienced precognition. So he seems to have some belief in psychic capabilities. One of the topics that would end up on the show a lot is remote viewing, which will factor into a story later. But he has described a story where he was sitting and watching the news all these years ago at his old California apartment before he was even in Nevada. And he basically says that he would park his car curbside in front of his ground level apartment and that he had like sliding glass doors that he could see out of. And so outside these glass doors is his car. And he claims that he's sitting there watching the news when he just feels this feeling wash over him that his car is about to be hit by something. And he would get up, he would go look out the window, out the doors, and look at his car, see nothing, and then go sit back down. He would feel this feeling wash over him a few more times and repeat this whole thing, gets up, goes to look, sits back down, until finally he gets up, looks out his doors, his glass doors, sees a man get into the car that is in front of his car parked on the curb, and then just immediately reverse and hit his car. Art believes that he like he believes that he saw this coming mentally, like he somehow knew this was going to happen. Doesn't explain how he thinks this phenomenon works or where it comes from, just claims that it happened to him.
I mean, that seems to be kind of some of his like his whole outlook on all of this stuff is like, I just know what I have experienced and what these people are telling me. I don't know how it all works. So I don't have all the answers, but we're all curious people. Which is like, you can say that's convenient, and it probably is, but I also think that there's something to that as long as you're not blind when evidence is presented to you.
Yeah.
So like I now on the other side of that, you look at this and think, okay, this guy had a fleeting thought about this something possibly happening, and then confirmation bias when something actually did happen.
Right.
It then pushed it into him thinking that he had that he went full Minority Report. Like, was he happening to be sitting in a fucking saline bath?
Did he detect thought
naked
crime?
With his two triplets his two other triplets that were like, and inscribing it on colored balls,
Right. No, exactly. I just, to me, it's like there's pretty solid real world reasons why you cannot like precognitively like realize your car is about to be hit, but that's whatever.
It feels kind of low importance for a precognition instant. Like a lot of times it's like, oh, I had this, I was just taken over by this feeling of my family member dying, and then you find out that like your great aunt passed away that day, right, or some shit. Like, those are the kinds of things that you hear a lot, or like a dog being found, or like something. But just like, oh yeah, I had a feeling that something was going to hit my car is I feel like is less precognition, more just like general anxiety.
Yeah. Which he in the book says that he has anxiety and panic attacks. So yeah.
Hey, I've been there too. I have also had intrusive thoughts of some bad thing happening, and then something somewhat similar happened as well.
Yeah.
Like I don't think I'm a fucking psychic,
Yeah, definitely. Another idea that Art is very fixated on is life after death. So if you listen to the show, you'll find that this comes up many times, especially on the Ghost to Ghost shows. I can't remember which episode it is, but I also remember him saying that if the afterlife is real, if there is life after death and spirits can come back or communicate with us, then he plans after his death to communicate with the living world again, through radio waves, of course. He was concerned enough about this topic and the spirit world that you can actually find people to this day claiming that they have channeled Art through like spirit boxes and things like that. So,
all right, I spirit boxes are really funny to me. I went down a rabbit hole one night of a spirit box YouTuber who just is this like British man who makes videos of him like yelling over his spirit box.
I've seen this guy,
and it's really fascinating. Just like how like as soon as a celebrity dies, you can go on YouTube and look up that person in spirit box, and within like 24 hours, people will be supposedly contacting like. The line to get into whatever afterlife must be very quick. They've got a great bureaucracy in whatever afterlife exists, because these people are ready to be contacted
immediately.
New phone book arrives daily in the afterlife.
Well, and him going on this show and saying that guarantees that literally until the heat death of the universe, until humanity is gone, people are going to try and channel Art Bell through spirit boxes in the radio.
100%.
So, now, it would be difficult for me to try and discuss all of Art's most famous or infamous, if you will, broadcasts. But there's a few that I would be remiss not to mention, which I've listened to both in depth, both of these things in depth, because it's wild. So most famously, I think, would be the panicked caller or frantic man. Do you know what that is, Niall? Do you know about this?
Maybe. I might have an idea of what you're talking about, just not know the name specifically.
You'll get this here in a moment. So September 11th, 1997, there were open phone lines on Coast to Coast, and Art was looking for people to call in with information about Area 51. And he had people calling in talking about their theories about Area 51 when he gets a particular call. And this person is panicked. And let me tell you, the way this person, it's a pretty good act this person puts on if it's an act. And I'm not saying that this person was real, but it is like, it's well acted.
You're just saying it's an entertaining watch.
Yes, yes.
You can get past the uncanny
valley. So this person calls up and they're panicked and they're saying like they don't have much time. He says, quote, "They'll triangulate on this position really, really soon." And you can hear him like crying as he's saying this. And he goes on and says, "What we're thinking of as aliens they're extra dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with. They've infiltrated."
Yes, I do know this. Okay.
They've infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly the Area 51. The disasters that are coming, the government, knows about them. They want those major population centers wiped out so that the few that are left will be more easily controllable. I say we, and then the signal cuts out. There's a handful of seconds of just dead air, and then suddenly Art Bell comes back on with the live broadcast. And he explains how they're now on a backup system and that something, he doesn't know what, kicked them off of the air. The satellite uplink transmitter had just failed with no explanation, and this had never happened before for Art Bell.
Jesus, okay.
So this is like, for the rest of this broadcast, Art Bell is talking to callers, and they're just like trying to figure out what happened, and people are, freaked out that this is like proof, this is evidence that the Area 51 conspiracy is real, and that this person has just been reclaimed by whatever secret agents are trying to prevent him from giving too much info. Now this story,
he was silenced.
Yeah, exactly. It's what it appears to be to people who believe. Now it's almost a year, and this story doesn't like get any extra additions to it. Like nobody adds to this story. They don't learn anything new about it. And then the same person, or at least a person claiming to be the original caller, calls in again and claims that the whole scenario is a hoax.
Oh.
There's not a lot much else about it. But of course, this person calling in has been scrutinized by listeners, and to this day, people will tell you, that's not the same person. The original person was taken by whoever from Area 51. And
okay, so we have a replacement situation.
Yes, okay. and this call-in saying it's a hoax was a cover-up by probably the government, agents from Area 51, Men in Black, whatever you want.
Okay. Like, I mean, that makes, like, I can see where someone would, because when something that weird happens, where the original call for that was like a perfect storm of probably happenstance and also like vague enough buzzword usage that it really just tantalizes the listener, like,
yes.
If you are going to like write the script for something like this, they did it almost perfectly.
Yeah.
And then, so like, I can see why people would think, okay, with all of that being said, I'm not going to believe anything that someone else says about this thing, especially if there's any way, even if the voice sounds slightly different or like the cadence is off or some shit. Like, I can see how someone would just completely discount any idea that this could not be real.
Yes, it's and like I said, like people should check this clip out because it really is genuinely creepy. Like it was creepy enough that it gets sampled in music and things. So the most prominent one Tool actually samples this audio on the album Lateralis, and Nile, the Paper Chase, samples it on the album Now You Are One of Us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think there's a hip hop group that sampled it. It's been in a lot of stuff. So no joke, like if you turn on Now You're One of Us, which is an album I happen to really like.
It's great.
And very themed around conspiracy and the paranormal and stuff. It's like kicks off with the audio of this guy crying about extra dimensional beings and stuff. It's pretty wild stuff.
When you first brought this whole thing up about the call in, I had like the reason it took me a minute to get back around to what you were actually talking about was I first remembered. Have you ever heard of the weepy voiced killer?
Yes, I have.
This is a true crime thing. This is not our normal shit.
Yeah.
It's whatever. Like, but for a while I was like, was the weepy voiced killer something to do with fucking Art Bell?
Oh no,
like,
I don't think so.
Because it's a guy that killed sex workers and then would call the police crying and talking about how he stabbed them and how it's so bad and leave anonymous phone calls. It's really fucked up. And the recordings are out there. You can hear the actual things, and it's fucked.
I think I have heard it because I had a very brief foray into true crime before realizing I don't want to hear that shit.
I was like, is there some connection? No. Okay.
No.
It took me a minute, but I'm with you now.
No. So that's probably one of the most famous coast to coast episodes and I guess incidents. Episode's not the right term, but you know what I mean. The other one that I would think of as being a huge deal, particularly because it's kind of controversial. There is the Halle-Bopp comet incident. Now, Halle-Bopp was a massive comet that passed near-ish Earth back in the 90s. And I actually got the sort of details of I've listened to these episodes. It's like over 4 hours long to kind of compile the whole saga as one, and you can go listen to it. But I actually went and got the exopolitics.com's blog post about the situation to kind of summarize the points of it. Which you recently covered Exopolitics.
Which I think .com is the other one. .org is the one that I was was my boy, right? I think so.
So 1996 to 1997. So the Halle-Bopp comet controversy, this occurs after an amateur astronomer from Houston, Texas, named Chuck Schrammick calls in to Coast. It's November 14th, 1996, and he's reporting that he has a photograph that shows an object behind the actual Halle-Bopp comet, so like trailing behind it. This call results in a number of episodes and guests coming on to discuss the issue. So one of them is a Dr. Courtney Brown, director of the Farsight Institute, which they're a group that's interested in, a lot of psychic phenomena, but in particular, they were into remote viewing. This is Courtney Brown. Dr. Brown had called Art Bell previously, and they'd talked about, aliens and spirituality and things like that. But this time they called in to give remote viewing data to Art Bell, and this was in response to Schrammick's claim of the photo. And this data was supposedly brought on to support Schrammick's claim that there is an object tailing Halle-Bopp. And their remote viewing data of the object suggests that it was complex and artificial and probably technological and was following the comet.
I vaguely remember hearing about reading about this somewhere or something, that people thought like a UFO was trailing the Halle-Bopp comet.
There's probably a reason you know about this, and we'll get to it. Unless you already have like heard about, because like Halle-Bopp was also wrapped up in like doomsday stuff as well.
Yeah, there's a bunch of shit that this thing gets tied into, but
so later on, Bell and Whitley Strieber are on the show. Like Strieber's basically co-hosting this broadcast, and they find out that Dr. Brown's webmaster had gotten these photos showing this thing behind the comet, and they wanted him to come on to discuss the photo. Now, the webmaster for Dr. Brown claims that they got this photo from an astronomer at a major university, and this astronomer wanted to be anonymous. And they had like confirmed this over the telephone. They talk about it with Brown. They get Dr. Brown on, and they talk about the images. And it's claimed by the webmaster, and then quote unquote confirmed through Brown, that the astronomer was going to have a news conference announcing the images in 1 or 2 weeks. This news conference never took place, right?
Right, yeah.
So
that doesn't sound like a thing that ever happened.
Yeah. So this sort of like both Dr. Brown and the Farsight Institute are kind of like discredited because of this situation. Bell would then, on January 14th, 1997, release the photo online. And this was done like after Brown had like been like, please don't put the photos out there. We need to like confirm some things. And, it potentially puts the astronomer at risk because the photo and the location of the comet, people can like pinpoint where basically saying like, don't dox this astronomer.
Yeah, you can give away personal information if you let this out there. Sure. Okay.
Now, after putting this photo out, Oliver Hainut and David Tholen, who are professors from University of Hawaii, contact Art Bell and say, "Hey, that photo that supposedly came from these remote viewing people, this is actually an altered photo of a recent comet picture that we took, and we can show you our photo to compare the evidence."
Please don't release this. We got to keep the astronomers safe.
Yes.
When in reality, he just edited someone else's photo badly.
So, January 16th, 1997, Dr. Brown goes on Art Bell's show for the last time, saying, "I'm not going to reveal the astronomer who had given this photo to the webmaster, and the webmaster's committed to not revealing the astronomer's identity, and only she knows the astronomer's name." And he claims that this astronomer has good intentions, but somebody else tricked them. And now he doesn't want to jeopardize this astronomer's reputation, and their confidentiality. There's like a whole yelling match between Art Bell and Whitley Strieber and Dr. Brown about like Art Bell just being like, there's no illegal thing happening here by you telling us where these photos came from. Like, I wouldn't worry about that. And, Dr. Brown's insisting that, I have reviewed the evidence. I've spoken with these people. I can guarantee that legal action will be on my head if I do this. Oh my God.
It's just entirely this guy covering his ass. Like Dr. Brown just being like, I can't give you any more information, because any more information that puts out there would show how much of a fucking charlatan this person is. All right.
Yeah. So
that's fun.
Brown would put out a statement publicly on January 20th, 1997, where he basically says that the photos were sent to him as part of a, quote, wide-scale and highly organized disinformation campaign with resources that extend beyond those of any university or professor, and that he feels that his Farsight Institute has walked into a trap with these photos. And so it's a whole fucking scandal. And this is the last, Dr. Brown does not go back on the show. There's a bunch of other bullshit that we don't really have to get into, but the punchline of all of this is pretty wild.
Okay. So we haven't even hit the punchline yet. Okay. What's
sort
up?
of no. So March 30th, 1997, there's an anonymous post that was made online, and it went up on the Farsight Institute's bulletin board. And this was a person who referred to themselves as the Watcher, and they claimed to be like a spy, and they wouldn't like they worked for some unidentified agency. And this person claims that this was a campaign to discredit remote viewing because intelligence officials who had worked on remote viewing projects in the past were not comfortable that information had become declassified. So we're talking like, I think it was MK Ultra that involved some of the remote viewing stuff that you can actually find the declassified documents on. I think that's one of them. Okay. And like, you know, that gets wrapped up in Project Montauk and all that stuff. So basically the Watcher also shared another little tidbit and said this, quote, what you do not know, but I'm telling now by writing this, is that several of the people who conduct remote viewing are feeding false information purposely. These predictions are nothing but fairy tales. And basically, the punchline is this. Nobody ever could verify the anonymous posting here. And this entire situation is now thought to have potentially, maybe, inspired the Heaven's Gate cult to commit suicide.
Oh, shit. Okay.
So, on March 27th, 1997, Heaven's Gate, I guess, determined that the appearance of Halle-Bopp was a signal that they were going to be able to beam up into the ship that was following it. Right.
I knew that they were related to Halle-Bopp. I just didn't realize there was this connection. Shit. Okay.
So it's kind of speculative because there isn't that much information to connect it necessarily because and on the website for Heaven's Gate, which by the way still online, it has a statement. There's a rumor that the website is kept online by 2 remaining members of the cult who did not commit suicide. But there was a statement on the website that said, quote, whether Halle-Bopp has a companion or not is irrelevant from our perspective. So,
okay.
It did.
If it doesn't have a companion, where are you getting beamed up to? But,
yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who knows? Now, holy moly, we're going to have to move fast here. There's another thing that Art Bell likes to get into, but that's the Halle-Bopp saga, by the way. You can listen. There's like 4 hours of that, and that is the condensed version. There's more to it, but that's the general idea. Art also has this idea that he really likes to bring up. He even wrote a book on the subject in 1997. This is something he calls the quickening, which
like the Highlander thing.
Well, yes, but for him, the quickening, and I guess in conspiracy at large now, because like for Art Bell, the quickening was this idea that like all these disasters, whether man-made or natural or all this stuff, is like accelerating and happening more and more. And that he doesn't really like so much of the stuff. He doesn't like really come to a conclusion. He's just like, I'm observing that shit's getting crazier and accelerating, economic collapse, political stuff. Like it seems to him that it's all sort of snowballing. Right.
Yeah. And I understand the feeling.
Yes. And so what happens though with this is like, it gets wrapped up outside of what he at least has said in The Art of Talk. Maybe he says more about it in the book that he wrote called The Quickening. But it gets wrapped up in a lot of conspiracy and UFO stuff. I just wanted to mention that because that's like a very key thing to him that he brings up on the show a lot, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Just like things are accelerating and it's crazy. Whoa.
Fair enough.
Now there's a few other notable stories that I have to go over very quickly, that you can go find on the show, on the archives. So probably one of the most famous is Mel's Hole, which it's a 1997 story where this guy Mel calls in to tell Art about a bottomless pit that supposedly exists on his property. and it's been there for ages. And they do it's a crazy. I've listened to the episodes on it. It's pretty entertaining. It's almost it's like it's guaranteed to be a hoax. Basically, nobody ever found this thing. And the story, just like what's so compelling about the Mel's Hole story, is it starts out with this guy talking about this like seemingly endless hole, and it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier as like this guy calls in multiple times. He calls Art Bell back, and they're like testing by putting things down the hole. It's very entertaining. There's another one that I've listened to as well about Evelyn Piglini. Now Art found this Dr. Evelyn Piglini, a person who contacted him after he put out an open line asking for real, true practicing witches. She was an Italian Strega witch, and I guess was very well practiced in the craft in witchcraft. And she would come on the show and talk about magic, the occult, predictions, all kinds of stuff, and callers would get to talk to her as well.
Okay, that's cool.
That's an interesting series of things. It's so funny because like when he announced her, he's just like, whoa, this is pure evil magic shit. It's just check it out. It's interesting. And then of course, you know, he talks about the paranormal. So another recurring thing would be the Ghost Investigator Society. That would be Barbara McBeath and Brendan Cook. They would come on and they would play EVPs basically and discuss them. And it's pretty, you know, if you find ghost stuff spooky, it's pretty creepy. These EVPs. So but that's really what it is. Those are just a couple of the kinds of things that you would find on here. Like Art would kind of the entertaining of these topics. It went every single place you could imagine. Basically, I mean, all kinds of people.
Yeah. I've looked through like that Art Bell Archive podcast thing where I've listened to a couple episodes, and if you just scroll through that, it's just like, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. I don't know what those are. I know what that like. It's just this long list of anything you could possibly think of.
Yes,
pretty impressive.
Yes, it's great. I highly recommend people check it out. As long as you're, you know, gonna have to suspend your disbelief for some of this stuff, of course. Yeah. So Art's entertaining of these like fringe topics and some of the questionable figures therein. Like this would lead to a sort of counter UFO conspiracy. Questioning sort of the validity or the authenticity of Art in his show. So I actually found an archived Usenet conspiracy group post in 1997 that says this, quote, some question has arisen as to whether or not late-night radio talk show host Art Bell is on secret government payroll to air his show, which focuses more and more on UFOs, aliens, and wacko conspiracies. A number of years ago, a talented talk show radio host who'd for much of his career lived in obscurity, always a local or regional celebrity but not known worldwide, with a mediocre show with mostly, like other talk shows, a political slant. Then he begins a weekend show devoted to the paranormal, in particular UFOs and aliens. That show becomes quite popular, and said radio talk show host begins to move the topic to his weeknight show, garnering much interest not only from the public but certain people within the government. Let's not stop him, it is decided. Let's make him bigger for our purposes. Said radio talk show host is approached by someone with a large broadcasting company, say the Chancellor Broadcasting Company, as an example, that is backed by illicit CIA funds. Said radio talk show host is told that his show can be syndicated all over the country rather than stuck in one region, that the paranormal stuff should always be the central focus. Said radio talk show host sees this as a golden opportunity. Keep in mind that disinformation is always a mix of the truth and lies to keep those seeking the truth running around in circles and never quite certain what is true or not. Art Bell's guests range from the quite credible to the quite lunatic, and Mr. Bell never argues or agrees with his guests, lets them talk. He lets his listeners make their own decisions. Many of his listeners, no doubt, believe what they hear. This format serves those special government people in other ways. They can keep track of what people, the call-in listeners, think and have experienced. They can keep tabs on controversial people like Sean Morton and Richard Hoagland. Why is it that certain guests on Art Bell disappear or come into harm's way and Art Bell never does? So there's even more to that post, but there is a suggestion that either Art Bell is an active agent for disinformation, or he is a quote-unquote useful idiot, if you will, for like the CIA, the FBI, the Richard Doties,
Yeah.
functioning like Paul Benowitz.
This platform makes a lot of sense for the government to take advantage of if they are doing a coordinated disinformation campaign, because it is a somewhat grassroots type feel. It matches all of the things you would want for a government entity to hijack a subculture. You know, like
Yes.
it fits perfectly if that were the case. I have no idea if that was the case at all. It just and honestly, like, outside of some censorship, I don't know if it truly matters if it is, you know. But it's definitely interesting to think about, because it fully makes sense.
Yeah, it's a natural, and like I don't think that Art Bell is a CIA psyop, really. I do think that people who came on the show were there's a possibility that like Lear, for instance, it's possible that maybe they saw an opportunity to get those stories out there. Paul Benowitz, the entire community, essentially.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So October 13th, 1998, in the middle of an episode, Art Bell announces very suddenly that there is a, quote, life-threatening, terrible event, and that this would be his last broadcast.
Oh, okay.
Now, people are freaking out. There's conspiracies that pop up because of this, because he just disappears for a bit. He would later return with basically no explanation, and for years, he would just kind of go in and out of retirement. It turns out there's a lot of stuff that was going on, health problems. His son was, I believe, sexually assaulted. There is really unfortunate stuff going on. And this is when, listenership starts to decline. Things start to wind down, and the heyday of Coast to Coast starts to end. So for the early 2000s, he's there occasionally, but he's in and out of retirement.
Okay.
Unfortunately, on January 5th, 2006, his wife, Ramona Bell, they'd been married for 15 years. She dies unexpectedly at the age of 47 from what seems to have been an acute asthma attack. Callers call in. George Norrie takes over, and people are calling in to offer condolences. George Norrie had been sort of taking the show over on and off between a couple different people since like 2002. And there's a bunch of weird stuff that happens with him. His wife dies January 2006, right?
Yeah.
In the same year, by the end of January, he like basically is giving these hints on air that something big is happening in his life. But he wants people to wait to find out what it is. And so in a year, in 2007, he'll tell people what's going on. And then it's April 15th, 2006. Listeners are kind of like, oh, okay, I guess that's what was going on. He reveals that Art Bell had spent several weeks mourning Ramona, and then he had gone to the Philippines and married a woman named Erin Ruiz.
Oh. Okay. That's
yeah.
I had no idea what the like big announcement was going to be. In my head, I jokingly thought, he immediately was packing up and going to Japan to find a new wife. And I guess I wasn't far off. So
yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that. That's good. I guess good for him.
It's very strange. Like I personally, whenever somebody is just like, just the idea of like my wife died and then like 3 weeks later I've decided to marry a new woman.
3 weeks is very short.
Here's the real kick in the. Here's the really gross thing. I guess it's not. Look, they're both consenting adults, but Ruiz was 21 years old when he married her.
And Art Bell was how old was he?
60s, something like that.
Okay.
Like he's an older man. It whatever, I guess, but also it's weird. Like it's a little weird. And you know, whatever. But it's, I don't know. So the 2000s, it's like nothing happened with Y2K, right? Things are really dwindling down, and sort of a new sort of paradigm in conspiracy is going to start taking shape. You know, he does like a show on 9/11 too. Like he has a whole thing on that. That's not very fun to listen to, though. I'll be honest. It's yeah. So a
lot of 9/11, like there are very few fun 9/11 shows to go back and listen to.
Yeah.
That in general, that's a pretty big downer of a time period.
Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff that happened that's like, honestly, if like genuinely not that interesting. Like there's like legal stuff where he's trying to bring his new wife over from the Philippines to the United States, and it's not that important. But the landscape is changing. Art Bell in and out of coast to coast. That the landscape of the show itself is changing. You know, he had really avoided a lot of politics except for a couple, you know, very libertarian things that he was interested in, such as gun control. But like the people who took over, like George Norrie, would definitely steer it in a more reactionary political way. And on December 11th, 2015, this is when we would get Art's basically final retirement message. He would post it on Facebook, basically saying that he was concerned for his family. And he says, quote, "If one of them were harmed because of what I love doing, my life would be over."
Okay.
So like throughout 2015, he talks about, and I think the next year as well, he talks about how there would be armed trespassers coming to his home.
Jesus. Okay.
They would like fire gunshots and people harassing him. Really very shitty.
Why in 2015? What?
I don't really know. There's like there's all kinds of weird stuff that starts happening to him, and you can actually go and find the FBI's documents on the situation of all the different shit. Basically, I think doing a show about weird shit, especially as the landscape of conspiracy starts to transform into what it is now, which I think the 2010s are kind of like when that starts to shift, really. It's unfortunate, but I think that this attracts people who are just like fucked up. So he kind of like, there's other things that happen. Like he ran a show very briefly on XM radio called Midnight in the Desert. He also had, even before that, something called Art Bell's Dark Matter. Oh, I'm sorry. Dark Matter was on Sirius XM. Midnight in the Desert was a digital network thing.
Okay.
But yeah, 2015, December 11th, he steps down permanently. And then in 2016, he is hospitalized with pneumonia. And he's unfortunately suffering from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And his health just kind of starts going down after 2016. And then on Friday, April 13th, 2018, he dies in his home in Pahrump, where his studio is, with what seems to have been an accidental prescription drug overdose.
Oh, okay.
So
I actually didn't know how he died.
Yeah.
I know he had
his health was in really bad shape, and he took too much of like the drugs that they had provided him because of his declining health, and it just killed him.
Okay.
So
that's sad.
Unfortunately, that's the end of Art Bell. Coast to Coast still exists, but as far as I can tell, I haven't really listened to the George Norrie stuff, but I can tell you this much: Art Bell fans not into George Norrie.
Not
stuff.
a fan?
Not for the most part. And I look, he had a lot of views that I think are really lame, and I think his non-committal like interest in drumming up controversy, he fully admits that, like, whatever, that's kind of terrible. But I really love the show, and I as a person, I find him very interesting. And Coast to Coast AM is like core to to this stuff, to the weird in the United States. Just straight up, it's inextricably linked.
Regardless of your feelings about the man personally, the show looms large over the world of weird, and will probably for years to come. Like it's a pretty Titanic level importance in the world. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
It's very interesting. And the other thing that I couldn't stop thinking about while listening to the show, hearing the how people talked about these things back in the like 90s and all that. It's like we now have QAnon, we have Alex Jones, just the most fucking terrible people. But back then it was still a touchy, potentially dangerous thing. I mean, just Milton Cooper, who I talked about earlier, Pale Horse and the Branch Davidians of the Waco siege, which even Art Bell, I kind of expresses something sort of sympathetic to those people, and the Branch Davidians, and it's just, it's always been here, but I don't think it wasn't until the 2010s and the 2020s that I feel like those people have felt more empowered and like their beliefs and opinions about the world like matter now. And so, yeah, it's weird to see the transition from Art Bell to this, I guess. So anyways, all right. That's Art Bell.
That's a fucking saga. All right. I like the way that he like fell backwards into having this radio program in a lot of ways, just by like wanting to do it and then being in the right place at the right time, led to this thing where he just was heard by 10 million people across the country. Like it's a really interesting story. I don't know.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, I do highly recommend checking out the show in the archives. It's very entertaining, and but it's just crazy how we're here now. And I don't know. I'm curious what Art Bell, like what he would think of like QAnon and all this shit. Like I wish he were still alive, just because I would want to know. I want to know. He feels like a relic of a past that just doesn't exist anymore. But honestly, I'm rambling at this point.
No, it is always interesting to like look at the people that. Okay, so QAnon feels so dark to us because it's a thing that is pervasive in our modern society and is there's no levity to it at all. Like there's no like laughing at it because it's so just. It feels like mental poison.
Lives are ruined over QAnon.
Yeah, and there's this like disconnect. But I guess like there's probably stuff like that. A lot of the Halle-Bopp stuff, like I mean, Heaven's Gate was a tragedy. Like that, but it was just before our time, so we don't have the like in the real time experience for it. So it would be interesting to see like what someone like Art Bell would have to say about it in this current age. Would he be able to lend a sympathetic ear to it, or would he not want it on his show? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's
impossible to say. Maybe not worth speculating, but it's I don't know. It's interesting, and listening to so much of the show. I mean, hours and hours of Coast to Coast now. It's very I feel weirdly comfortable with Art Bell, and it's just I feel curious.
Love that parasocial relationship.
Yes, with a dead man. So. Yeah, I did not cover everything. If people want to know more, I mean, the show is out there. The books are out there. Check it out. I do recommend it. Art Bell, interesting guy. Weird fucking guy.
I just imagined us as like a Patreon feed doing It Gets Weird reacts to Coast, and we just sit there and listen to episodes of Coast to Coast and occasionally go, Huh, all right.
Yeah, that would
The most just boring fucking nonsense.
No, we can't. I would never do that. But I do anticipate Art Bell's episodes coming up in this show for the rest of the time that we do it. So
yeah.
Niall, are you ready for a big question?
Oh fuck yeah, I'm so ready.
Who's playing Art Bell in the biopic? I have my answer.
I'll let you go first. That's fine.
I think it would be kind of fun. Partly because I think he has a captivating voice, which is important to the character of Art Bell. But he'd have to work on himself a little bit and maybe have a different demeanor. But I think Ron Perlman could be kind of a fun Art Bell.
So like a later era Art Bell. Okay.
Yeah, he needs a mustache, for sure. And I don't know how you do this movie exactly, other than you wrap Art Bell up in these stories of UFOs and things like that, and I don't know how this movie works, but I want Ron Perlman, and maybe for like when Art Bell is in the military, like doing illegal radio stations, we can just de-age Ron Perlman, use some of that Irishman technology, and put him back in the military. But I think it's Ron Perlman. That's fun to me.
I'm gonna make an animated movie and just have Chris Pratt voice him, just like everybody. No, my actual I was trying to come up with like a fucking just really good casting, sitting here, and I feel like there's a version of this movie that would get greenlit by having Ryan Gosling in the lead.
Oh God.
That's not the version that I specifically want, but I feel like there is like he can play kind of weird normal dude pretty well when he like puts a mustache on him and isn't like ripped to shit, but the person that I've kind of come around on and is I think could actually do it pretty well, is Jimmy Simpson, who people know from Westworld, or
I'm looking
he also is one of the McPoyles on Always Sunny, but he's in Zodiac as in a small part that I think is pretty good, and just shows up as like he's a legitimately good dramatic actor, but he also is very funny. So I think he can be an interesting personality on the radio while also doing the more dramatic parts well. So I think he strives. He kind of straddles the line well for what this role might need.
Okay, yeah, I like that. And there could be like a bunch of funny references to him being a McPoyle. He comes out in a robe. He's drinking milk. But he's also at his home broadcasting station with his cats and his Asian wife. Yeah. So
sounds like a hit movie. Let's go. A24, do it.
God. I think that about wraps up this episode. This has been part 2 of Art Bell. Thank you, Niall, for putting up with my process here.
No, you're good. Let's go ahead and take care of some business. So if you want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
And we're on all your favorite podcatchers, from Stitcher to Google Play to Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you listen to It Gets Weird, if you listen to podcasts, look up It Gets Weird. I'm probably there.
Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. We do, in fact, play games on Twitch. Right now, I've been playing Elden Ring with good friend of the show, Colin, who folks out there would have heard if they've checked out certain episodes of this show. And you can email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Email us your favorite Coast to Coast episodes. Maybe it'll be one I haven't heard yet, and I can check it out. But let us know what are some of your favorite topics that Art covered back in the day. Patreon.com/ItGetsWeird. We have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. I already talked about the $5 tier a little bit here, kind of gassing up Internet Experience Deluxe, but we also have a $2 tier where we do It Gets Weird TV. Right now we're watching season 1 of the X-Files and discussing the show, and that show comes out every other week on the $2 tier. At the $5 tier, you get access to that show plus the shows in the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV. So you're getting bonus content every single week. One of the $5 tier shows, of course, is Internet Experience Deluxe. But Niall has a show. We've watched movies, all kinds of stuff. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday. on your own personal feed. And then you also get access to the Discord where we're discussing all kinds of weird shit. You can talk directly with us on Discord. And then if you can't donate it at the $2, oh my God, just drag me back and shoot me. It's been a long week. If you can't donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, we also have a $1 tier where you're just kind of giving us a tip. You're saying, hey, I like what you do. Here's $1. Thanks for doing it. You don't get anything out of it, just the satisfaction of helping out your favorite podcast. If you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Well, thank you all for continuing to support the show and for listening. Keep spreading the word to everyone you know. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, signing out.